I've always felt quite comfortable with when sex comes up in therapy. I have felt very comfortable with the whole thing. So Venus has been my friend. I'm aware that in my chart, Venus is on the midheaven, as she often appears, and but I feel her there. That means be at the very top of the circle, and it's like she's out there. It's like it's my way. It's my way is to have the Venusian out there. So when I write a book, I want it to be Venusian. I pay attention to
Mm,
if there's any way I can make it more beautiful, I'll do that.
mm,
Beauty is a very important aspect of it. And I like talking and writing about sexuality. I feel like I have something to say about it. And I think having had that vow of chastity helped me. It gave me a view of all sides of this thing. And
mm,
I don't feel repressed from it. And uh, I feel basically, I think there are some wounds from it for sure, just being a Catholic, that you get sexual wounds.
mm,
But in general, I came off pretty well, especially being in the monastery with that vow.
mm. And what is your star sign again? What is it? Again, I'm not an expert on this, but you're a Libra, aren't you? And that isn't that ruled by Venus?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Libra is ruled by Venus, so that makes it even stronger. Yeah.
Yeah.
Venus is strong. And also, if I'm not mistaken, trying to remember, Venus is in a sign at the midheaven. She's in a sign that she rules. So it's very strong.
Yeah, I can see that come through. And when you talk about writing, meaning letter writing and longhand writing and things like that,
Yeah.
that love of the beauty comes through.
Yeah. Although I never do that.
Not anymore.
I love writing. I learned how to type when I was a teenager, and I can type very fast. And so I'm very happy to be able to write fast, write these books quickly. It would be hard if I had to struggle at it.
I know we're getting on and maybe going over a little, but I have a couple of quick questions to ask you. Is one thing I heard Jung say, which I liked, but I've never really understood, and I think you put in one of your books, that the work begins in Mercurius and ends, with Mercury.
Oh, yes, right, right.
It sounds true to me, but what does it actually mean?
Well, I think what it means is that uh, Hermes or Mercury, Hermes and Mercury are pretty well identical.
Mm,
Uh, Hermes and Mercury would be the god of form, of language, of cleverness, creativity, all that whole combination of things that so that if you want to be involved in an alchemical process, let's say a certain part of your life, you see it alchemically, something developing in your life. What you'll notice, I think, is that the spirit at the beginning is one of creativity and of having to work out new ideas, to be inventive, to solve problems early on. It's all Mercury, it's all Hermes at the beginning. It's not really about Venus, making everything beautiful and
mm,
being part of nature and all. That's not really. That's not the time of beginnings. Beginnings is more imagining and yeah, picturing the future for you and that sort of thing. It's what Jung described very well when he wrote about the child archetype. He called it as a time of beginnings.
mm,
So I think that's why Jung would say that the alchemical process begins in Mercurius or Hermes, and it ends in Mercury because uh, the way he puts it, of course, he quotes a famous line from the Middle Ages that my end is my beginning.
mm,
So when you come to the end, you start over, and your end becomes the material for the beginning. And there has to be this elision, this passage from the end of one thing to the beginning of another. That is very mercurial to work that out. And it's mercurial to even talk about it. My end is my beginning. It's kind of a paradox. So a paradox would be very much in the realm of Mercury. It's a way of thinking that you gain something by its juxtaposition, by the way it's formed and shaped, and how mysterious it is, not by getting a good idea, but by being struck by the paradox. Hermes also teaches through surprise. So if you are surprised at something that you're reading, that is the mercurial, the Hermes aspect of your reading. And or awakened, we talk about awakening. I was awakened by reading this book. Well, that's Mercury. He wakes people up and puts them to sleep.
And you don't mention, it seems to me, you don't mention the trickster much, but, it's a little similar, isn't it? Hermes,
There's
the
an
trickster.
element, there's an element of trickster, but I think it probably is a mistake to equate the trickster with Hermes.
Right.
Trickster is a little different, but there are obvious some similarities between them. But I would say they're not the same figure really. They share some aspects, yeah.
It seems to me in the present environment, we were talking just before we started, and it's such a what's the word? Some people call it the culture wars, and it's a strong environment, binary, clash, earnest, and um, not much of that mercurial surprise. That approach.
I often say that one of the big problems with modern life is that we have so little wit. We don't have much wit. Like politicians are so flat, they don't really have wit. They try to be witty and it doesn't
Mm,
work.
mm.
They just don't have it in them. They don't have the spirit of Mercury to be able to do it. And if anyone needs Mercury, it's a politician. So we don't have it in our world. I try to be witty and giving talks, and people just sit there, with stone faces sometimes.
That's like
What
when
is
I
it?
tell jokes. That happens.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
That's what
I
I'm
know what
saying.
you mean. And I think, fundamentalism maybe too. Like there's a lot of ideology, a lot of fundamentalism around, which is unfortunate because it's harsh.
It's harsh and heavy and dull. Yeah.
Boring, perhaps, is maybe one of the biggest and
Oh, the worst things
worst
is
things you
very.
can say. Yeah.
There's no mercury in it to lighten things up.
Mm,
Mercury, they say, the most Hermes, the most outstanding quality is that he is a guide of souls. Guide meaning he actually guides you around. He's a guide of souls. He takes you where you need to go.
mm.
It's like you see him had just been guiding Dante down into the Inferno. He's a guide. He takes people where they need to go, takes the soul. And so we need Hermes. Without him, we don't have the benefits of soul.
Right. And I've got one last question for you. Carl Jung said something along the lines one has to find one's myth. What myth is one living? What are your favourite myths? I was thinking, well, polytheism, maybe you can't just have one favourite myth, but
Yeah,
uh,
really.
maybe you have to have a few. But I'm wondering, when you go back to a myth again and again, is there one that stands out to you?
Well, I have to say that when I'm giving talks, the mythic figure I like most to talk about is Hermes. I was just talking about him, and I enjoy that. I enjoy him as a figure. Um, in terms of stories, there's so many. I have been drawn to the Artemis stories around Artemis and to the young men around Artemis. The story of Actaeon appealed to me, and I wrote an article for Hillman once for a book that he published. I wrote an article on Actaeon, who was a young man who saw Artemis taking a bath and she turned him into a deer. And he was torn apart. by his dogs. That story has always charmed me. I wondered about what's going on. It's not that it's a happy story, but it's one that I recognize somehow. I feel that when I was a monk, I was doing the Actaeon thing. I was trying to see the goddess somehow. I was trying to, we called it God, but I was probably Artemis was God, part of God that I was looking for. And I was trying to find God. And I was it was a disturbing experience to do that at that time. But I do feel a closeness. For example, the play Hippolytus by Euripides, which is about a young man whom Aphrodite causes to fall in love with his stepmother. And so his father comes in and kills him. It's a pretty tragic story of a young man being too devoted to Artemis, too pure, and not willing to worship at the altar of Aphrodite. And that's where I was, I think, in my early years. And so stories of Artemis, it's not that I love reading them, but I'm drawn to them because I think that deep down they do represent the deep story narrative that has been going on in me, not out of my choice, but just happening.
Mm. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And I want to thank you. And also, I know that so many people have taken so much from your work and your books and your deep thinking about the soul and always taking us back towards the soul. So,
Yes. Oh,
thanks very much.
well, thank you. This is a really good conversation, and it's not often I have a chance to talk this way, to get into it deeply. And so it's a great pleasure for me to have done that, and I thank you for it.